Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural. As you see, Mr. Russell is still dancing. We're happy that you're here with us today, that we have another opportunity to really talk about where the legal meets the cultural. We're missing one of our co-hosts today who is off-site, but he's with us in presence, and some of you are watching this on his page, but we're excited that we've been running this show throughout the whole of COVID-19, giving you information, resources, and tactical ways that you can arm yourself in your community, knowing the legal. Attorney Royce Russell, you're really going to need to stop dancing to our intro.
I mean, that intro is such the bomb. You know what I mean? A little din, 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 din. I mean, I just need that when I roll up in the courtroom with the bow tie, ready to do the do. That's this type of music. You got some people playing it in the background that I can roll with. You know, I'll pay them at least minimum wage. We can roll in. We could do our thing. We just clap it, and we could just, because that's the type of outcomes that happen. When, you know, when it's all said and done, we walk out free, or we walk out with that money. We just like you know what I'm saying? So I mean, you know, hey, look, I'm just.
Legal meets the cultural.
Hey, that's why we got to have the music, because the culture got to be popping or it ain't for real. And, you know, in a heavy space, I like to add a little levity, but you know, you got to do what you got to do. But that music is definitely fly. I love it. It makes me want to be part of the show. Can you picture that? It makes me want to be part of the show. Check that out.
So, well, I'm glad to know our production team is doing an excellent job.
There you go.
Dancing, and you can catch the replays. We'll let you know how to do that, because we're almost 2 seasons in. The amount of shows that we produce since April. So yeah, we've been about it, giving information and getting information. So I'm just fresh off of coming back from supporting. Hey, all of you that are joining in, we appreciate you being there. The Black Business Equity Coalition had a rally march from the African Burial Ground today to City Hall. And I want to shout out my girl, Francilia Wilkins Rahim, who's one of the coordinators in NYRAC, New York Real Estate Investors Corporation. I probably am jacking up what NYRAC really means, but it's about—
They were present. They were
there. Hey, Gina, how you doing? So we went from the African Burial Ground, which was an appropriate place to start when you talk about the economics of the city and what this city was built on. And just remembering our ancestors and how we represent the struggle if we are conscious enough to keep our voices and the pressure and actual change and reform happening. So this rally was about the economic tragedy that we're seeing with economics on the Black businesses and the opportunities that are not equitable across the board, even for those who have certifications, for those who have had access. The percentages and the numbers that they were going over today were really like, wow, we have so far to go. And New York is one of the most progressive economies in the country when you talk about the millions to billions that get spent, and we're left out of the equation. So that's what the march was today. And I was happy to be there to support and to listen to all of those lift their voices up around Black equity now, and that Black businesses matter, because if more Black businesses stay in business, we can employ more Black people, keep crime down, which is what we talk about partially here in Speaking Legally, how to really navigate the legal justice system. But if you don't have money, you don't have access, we know what happens. So shout out to—
You know what, and you mentioning that, I think about, you know, the term that I use when I'm making presentations or doing workshops as far as cardiac arrest, a tactical guide on how to handle unlawful police stops. I usually say, if you don't want to become victimized, you have to turn the word victim upside down. And we talk about voting, right, which we're seeing an uptick in that. We talk about intervening. We've seen an uptick in that by way of social media, by way of people getting involved. And when they see unlawful or excessive force, unlawful arrest or excessive force. We talk about T being truth tellers, right? And the truth be told, Black businesses are suffering just like every other area and is underserviced. And if you're going to be committed to Black lives, and you have to be committed to Black businesses, for which funding can come about to help some of the other organizations that are trying to propel the social justice and equities in the justice system. And if you talk about, the I, you're talking about infiltration, which means that we can't work from the outside in, that there will be people that have to come along this road that will entertain becoming police officers and going in there and trying to change the system from within, or change law enforcement from within. And they need our support. And they need our support economically. And so this is where we get to, we start talking about, the VIC, C, the collaboration, before we get to the T, truth tellers, but C, for the collaboration. And so here's the collaboration. The collaboration is that I often talk about the thinkers and the thumpers coming together, right? It can't be one voice. It has to be a multitude of voices. And for organizations to go out there and do what they need to do, such as Cop Watch, or Until Freedom, or Gathering for Justice, or Justice Committee, or Justice League NYC, all of these organizations need funding. And where they get their funding from? They just can't get their funding from what I'm going to characterize as white America. They get their funding from the color of America, which is Black folks, Latino folks, the shades of brown. And so if you're not talking about equity when it comes down to supporting what I'm going to call shades of colors of business, minority businesses, then the revolution is going to be stopped right in its tracks, because there's no money to fund that. And so we need to be mindful of that if we're going to be truth tellers, if we're going to be infiltrators, and if we're going to make a difference, which is the end. Make a difference. How do we make a difference? We make a difference by having the rally that you had today, having the rally that ECRB, Election Civilian Review Board, having all the things that we're doing, a place to speak out here, cardiac arrest day in the future, where we'll have folks up and about talking about a variety of ways to affect change. All of these things have to happen in order for there to be movement. So I'm glad you were today. Unfortunately, I could not make it. I had to put pen to paper, but I'm glad to see that is happening. And when we talk about Black businesses, we're talking about attorneys too. Attorneys, who are out there to have their own practice, that's a business. Where's the arbitration? Where's the mediation? Where are the contracts to represent folks in unions, which are usually our people? Where are they going to? How come they're not coming to us? And one last point, I read just recently that White & Case, which is a big law firm, is putting millions and multi-millions of dollars in support of Kaepernick's Know Your Right camps. Well, that's nice, that's fine, that's wonderful, I applaud it, but there's other organizations that are not Kaepernick named. You got Life Camp for Erica Ford. They should be putting money there. You got the workshops we do here at Cardiac Arrest. They should be putting money there. There's no shame in my game to ask for that money, because if you're talking about correcting social injustice and you're talking about putting money out, just don't put out money put out money in a place and on a person that everybody's already supporting. Nike, Disney, the NFL in and of itself. Put that money in other places where it's far reaching and the voice needs to be heard. So that's my story right now before it
before we get started. Well, no, and it's absolutely what we need to talk about in our community. Who's doing the work? At the end of the day, who's doing the work? Who's visible? You and Ed are out there on the streets every day. There are other attorneys across the country that are doing the same thing. So let's highlight the people who are doing the work in our communities. We're not waiting for someone to come save us. We have to save ourselves. Black businesses matter. We have to make sure we have access to the same sort of capital and contracts that everybody else does. And even with the set-asides and the quotas that are supposed to be reached for MWBEs, the numbers are still embarrassingly low for Black business. So the story continues. The revolution clearly is being televised. And that's a great segue into what we're going to start talking about right now, which is Governor Cuomo here in New York City. For those of you that are in New York, has shared some information by signing into law the budget. And we're going to talk a little bit about this 2021 budget and some of the highlights on how that affects us in our community. What does this really mean? You could read the whole article on governor.newyork.gov, but we're going to highlight a few of these pieces, and then we're going to jump into another portion of our show today. And once again, Edward Pichardo, Esquire, sends his love and regards, and he'll be back on the show after his travel. So, Royce, did you get a chance to look over this enacted budget highlights? What did
Yeah,
it?
yeah. It's hot on my list, and that's why we canceled any other conversations that we were going to have today to look at this because you know, and I know, I'm always talking about being critical readers and critical thinkers. And you know, while I always say this, we're playing checkers, other folks are playing chess. While we're sleeping, other folks are thinking. And so this is an example of playing checkers and chess. So the checkers is that we have this bail reform, and people are like, oh yeah, we got the bail reform, and things are going to be different. The chess is that in signing a budget for 2021, you have a variety of laws and acts that is taking place that folks don't even know about that is going on, and you just think that's budget. You just think that it's budget. You're signing a budget, but yeah, you're signing the budget, but you're signing a whole bunch of different laws that are going to come into effect fairly shortly. So, for those that ignore Como and ignore the budget process, you know, you are ignoring the law because there are several things in here that are legal relations and will affect our community in some shape or fashion. So let's be critical thinkers and let's dive into some of this. For those that's looking for something sexy, you got to turn down your sexy volume for today because this is plain, you know, reading down some laws that you probably didn't even know exist based upon the budget being passed. And so we can start with one of the ones that I think is important, which is the establishing the paid sick leave for working New Yorkers, right? As we talked about Black businesses, which are usually small businesses, and we talked about injustices and making sure that justice is on a playing field for everyone to have. We have the paid sick leave for working New Yorkers, and you have it up on the screen. What does it say? To further empower the New York workers and protect all consumers in the state. The the fiscal year 2021 enacted budget enacts a paid sick leave program for working New Yorkers. Businesses with 5 to 99 employees will provide their employees at least 5 days of job protected paid sick leave per year, and the businesses with 100 employees or more will provide at least 7 days of paid sick leave per year. Smaller businesses with 4 or fewer employees will guarantee 5 days of job protected unpaid sick leave to their employees every year. Small businesses already providing paid sick leave will be able to do so. So, I mean, you know, that sounds crystal clear, speaks crystal clear, but at the end of the day, did we know that that was going to be part of fiscal planning and something that the budget was going to speak to and talk to? I know for sure when I look at the next subject matter, and I'll let you speak to it, which is legalizing gestational surrogacy in New York State. I had no way of knowing that was part of the fiscal year. And can you please educate those who are just like me, who had no way of understanding that this is part of the fiscal year passing?
I had no idea. So basically, this is saying that the enacted budget legalizes gestational surrogacy in New York State once and for all, helping LGBTQ couples and couples struggling with infertility. So this legislation will also establish criteria for surrogacy contracts and that provide the strongest protections in the nation for parents and surrogates, ensuring all parties provide informed consent at every step of the process, and will create a surrogates bill of rights. This is interesting. Maybe I missed it in the news. I don't listen to the news every single day because it's just too toxic, but I had no idea that this was here. And then there's, so this is interesting. That was a part of the budget. How many of us really pay attention to the budget in our community? When we talk about the legal meeting, the cultural, we only listen to the highlights. We've all been guilty of that. But really going and understanding what is passed, we don't know how many people this will affect. And then the one that we probably did hear about was go ahead, Royce.
I'm sorry. And I'm wondering, and I think I've watched almost every Como press update about Corona. It would be nice to have a press update about this and just go through what we're doing right now. 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever, 20 minutes, and go through this is what is about to be passed. I'm sure there was hearings. I'm sure somebody's voices were heard as to this, but do we really know what made the cut and what didn't make the cut? And I for sure, when we talk about the next law, which is the New York Hate Crime Anti-Terrorism Act, we knew about that. They talked about that. That's something that's been out there. So that's been in the forefront. And now we know is that it's a new A1 class felony, punishable up to life in prison without parole. And that is huge because just like we've seen acts of terrorism change depending upon the person who's being accused, because the definition is not necessarily fortified and stable. Here's another piece of legislation and criminal act where I need some definitions. I need for it to be defined a little bit more than what it is. And I can see the implementation being being abused and being misused. And so we need to keep our eye on that.
Yeah, because domestic act of terrorism motivated by hate, that seems like you would have a couple of additional sentences that would really explain what that is. So we definitely have to look out for that and to see how the tide turns, depending, to your point, who is being charged with such crime.
Yeah.
And the closing out of state gun loophole.
Now look to me, that is important. I mean, like, that is like really important information. And I'm an attorney, and I don't even remember there being any discussion or any forefront in the media or otherwise about this. And it's important to read this. And I'm going to use my screen and I'm going to read it. It says, the fiscal year 2021 enacted a budget that includes legislation to prohibit individuals from obtaining a gun license who commit serious offenses out of state that would disqualify them from obtaining a gun license if committed in New York. So if you commit, let's just say, I'm going to pick a crime. You commit rape in Alabama, right? If you get convicted of that there, then in New York, you can't get a gun because that's a crime that will prevent you from getting a gun. So even though you didn't get convicted of it in New York, you're out, right? This will provide greater consistency in New York's licensing scheme and ensure individuals who are prohibited from purchasing a firearm are not able to do so. The enacted budget also includes legislation to require all state and local law enforcement agencies in the state to opt in to the ATF's crime gun trace data or data sharing program and submit crime guns recovered through the ATF's trace system. Additionally, the enacted budget includes legislation to amend the mental health hygiene law to allow New York to share reports of individuals who are a danger to themselves or others with other states. That's important. I mean, I think that's critical when you talk about addressing mental illness and addressing mental challenges. And it's almost what we call in the workplace, putting other states on notice, that now you're on notice that this individual is in your state and maybe you should do something about it. So I thought that was extremely important. I would like to see something that speaks to, well, what happens if you have a licensed gun in Philadelphia and you come in New York because you don't have a license here? Does that mean you should go to jail? We see that, at least I see that happen all the time. The gun is in its proper case. The gun is locked. The ammunition is to the side. You have a license that you got from Delaware and, you can carry it. And the next thing you know, you're here in New York. Don't ask me why you're here in New York with the gun, but you're here in New York and they arrest you and you produce the paperwork to say, hey, look, I'm a licensed carrier in Delaware. Here's all of my paperwork. Why should you be convicted of a crime if it turns out that the gun was not used in any illegal manner? Maybe what should happen is that if you're stopped by the police and they happen to find this gun and you're able to produce all the paperwork, they hold it until you get ready to leave, and then they send it back to you, or then you're able to pick it up. Something. We have to come up with something that's creative rather than if you're caught with it, and although you have a legal license to carry elsewhere, you automatically go to jail.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's food for thought and something to bring to the table, because you see this every day and people might not realize that they would be prosecuted if they came because they have a license. So that was a good one. The housing and services for people who are homeless, including those with mental illness, New York's homeless community. This part here, I really hope that the budget includes it says an aggressive strategy and additional support to provide housing services to the vulnerable populations. That sounds like a real good line, but I really hope that we are addressing this. As a victim of someone who had mental illness on the street and was let out because there was no space and didn't receive any sort of assistance in rehabilitation, I hope that this is more than lip service and that we really do put some money behind organizations who are on the street, helping the homeless population, getting the mental health assistance and treatments that are required and necessary, because what we're seeing with the upticks in abuse, in spousal abuse, in the numbers are crazy. I was speaking to one of my psychologist friends who was saying, look, be careful. The uptick is getting worse. We're not even in the heat of the summer yet. Alcohol abuse is up. Like, all of these things contribute to the mental health and state. And when we talk about the legal meeting the cultural, we really have to be aware that we're dealing with some of these issues in our community, and we have to stay loud about the resources going in the right places so that we can get assistance where needed.
One of the things that I thought when we talk about legal meeting, cultural meeting and legal, is this next, I guess, passage of policy. And this is to all my people that's selling the loosies out on the street corners, everybody that's selling their little, vape on the side. You better watch yourself. You know what I mean? You better watch yourself. So New York has enacted a comprehensive tobacco control policy. Governor Cuomo has taken unprecedented steps to ensure the health and the safety of all New Yorkers by combating the use of harmful tobacco and nicotine products. The reason why, we talk about New York is because obviously my practice is in New York and in New Jersey, but we know that New York usually takes the first step and then other states take several steps right after New York. California is the same, metropolitan area that'll take a step and everybody's looking at them. In Chicago, and we see that New Jersey follows step by step with New York. And so, it's important to note that that's the rationale for us reading this, and also to give information to our viewers and listeners. And so I'll go on. The enacted budget prohibits the sale or distribution of e-cigarettes or vapor products that have a characterizing flavor unless approved as part of the FDA pre-market approval. Prohibits the sale of tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, in all pharmacies, restricts the delivery of e-liquid products only to New York State licensed vapor retailers, restricts the public display of tobacco and vapor products near schools, requires manufacturers of vapor products to disclose to the DOH, Department of Health Commissioner, and the public information regarding the ingredients, byproducts, or contaminants in vapor products, whether intentional or unintentional added, ban certain carrier oils if they are determined to be harmful, ban coupons and manufacturer discounts and displays in shops, and increases the penalty for illegal selling of tobacco to minors. Underline, increases the penalty for illegal selling tobacco products to minors. There's one of those sentences that you really need to do some critical thinking on. What's the penalty? Is the penalty financial? Or for the guy who's standing on the corner who's selling the loose vapors or whatever, I got flavored cherry, whatever they may have, is that more punitive and more in line with incarceration? I would like to see that defined. It affects different people in different ways, but this is the things that we need to keep our eyes on.
But we also need to be conscious of the fact that this vaping is killing people.
Right. So, look, it's in the right place. Don't get me wrong. The legislation is in the right place, but we need to know about it, right? And from a defense perspective, being a defense attorney, I want to make sure those who think about this, know what they're doing, and at least is conscious that, ignorance of the law is not a defense. So we at least need to know the law and not out there, promoting what we think is the law. And we just need to know that this exists. So it's not that I don't like it. I just want us to be aware that it does exist. And if I slept on it, I know a lot of people slept on it.
Well, I think we need to just underscore what you said. Ignorance of the law is not a defense. Like, somebody needs to tweet that out. post that everywhere, because a lot of people will use that. I've heard that on the street when folks are trying to do the sidewalk lawyer argument. That's what I call it. Everybody knows the law, and then, no, you can't do that. You can't. No. Well, I didn't know. Ignorance of the law is not a defense. I think I'll just type that in for everybody in case you missed it, because that's a good one. And then there's so much more in the budget, but we're going to hit maybe one or two more points because we have another topic to get to today.
Well, this is the last point for me on this subject matter. If you see something else, then we can go to it. But I think it's banning the pink tax. First of all, I didn't know a pink tax even existed, right? But now we're banning something that I didn't even know exists. So what is the pink tax? Because you're banning the pink tax. So the fiscal year 2021 enacted budget prohibits gender-based pricing discrimination for substantially similar or like-kind goods and services. The legislation would require certain service providers to provide price lists of standard services upon request, and notice that gender-based price discrimination is prohibited under the state law. Businesses that violate the law would be subject to civil penalties. Now, I was trying to figure out what was an example of this. And not that our listeners need to know it, but I kind of wanted to know it myself. And the only thing that I can come up with, and I'm sure there's people that are brighter than me, but one of the things that came to my brain, and that's just because maybe I left the barbershop not too long ago, is that, there is some type of pricing, like my afro compared to a young lady's afro, you know what I mean? Ladies, they get maybe charged less, brothers get charged more, something that's the only thing I can think of that was that obvious, right? I'm sure there's something that's more profound than that. But just as an example, if you feel that you're being discriminated against because of your gender and based upon the services that you're receiving, that is now banned, right? And so that's what I have to say to that.
Well, I didn't even know about that pink tax. I was trying to say, did I hear about it before? But not really sure about that one. But it's good to know that this is in and a part of the budget. We need equity in so many different areas. And of course, there's more on Mother Nature and environmental issues and middle class. Well, you know what? I think we might need to just hit this one real quick.
Okay.
The middle class tax cuts.
Yes.
That was an interesting one before we switch gears, because this continues to lower personal income tax rates for middle class New Yorkers. So in 2020, the third year of the multi-year tax cuts enacted in 2016, income tax rates have been lowered from 6.85% to 6.09% for taxpayers in the 43,000 to 161,550 income bracket. Now, I'm not going to read all of this because it doesn't apply to everyone, but I wonder if we're going to see significant savings in our community for those who are considered middle class that would give a savings, because they're estimating $4.2 billion in annual savings for 6 million filers by 2025.
We should only hope. It's funny money, funny numbers. Funny numbers.
That's interesting. But more interesting news is that we know we're still dealing with the coronavirus, right? We're still dealing with, unfortunately, a lot of situations that are happening around us that we really hope and pray we get to the point where we can see this nightmare end. But unfortunately, we're not at that place yet. And in addition to families and communities having to worry about how to navigate this new normal and stay safe, wear your mask, use your hand sanitizers, there's a whole nother community that has to be really thought of and acted on, which is what we're seeing now with jails releasing inmates because of coronavirus. And New York just took a step to lock more people up. So
let's go in the critical dive on this. Number one, the reason why we brought this back is because history is fading, right? We have the pandemic, everybody's on it, everybody's talking about it, and then all of a sudden, the next big news happens, right? And unfortunately, the next big news is news that we've already lived through, and we know far too often it happens daily to a variety of folks in our community, which is, the excessive force and force arrest and the misuse and abuse of our community when it comes down to law enforcement. All right. But as we take that on and as we march the march and try to improve in that area and make sure our voices are heard, what happens is that the volume goes up on that issue, rightfully so, but then the volume goes down on the corona issue in reference to inmates and those that are incarcerated. Now, we may be talking about corona, and what you hear in the media is corona as it relates to what the school year is going to look like, what September is going to look like for kids that are in high school and elementary and middle school. What is that going to look like? And that is of importance. But as they often say, the immigrants are the forgotten class, those that are undocumented. Well, those that are incarcerated are quickly becoming the forgotten class. And the reason why I say that is that when you look at an article like this that speaks to New York kind of working in a reverse mode, first is shocking, and I can understand why they wrote the article, at least titled it that way, so people would look at it. But what is more critically profound is what the article is talking about. And the article is talking about the contradictory stands that New York has in one area versus another area. And so, if I may, we know that there was major bail reform in New York, in the state of New York, which affected our community and still affects our community. And that is that if you were charged with a misdemeanor crime or a drug-related crime or a non-violent drug-related crime or a non-violent crime, the likelihood of bail being issued was high. The likelihood of you not being able to make that bail, whether it was $750, whether it was, $5,000, was high. And so therefore people were incarcerated and they would lose their jobs, they would lose their housing. The family unit would be separated, and you would have issues that are long lasting than just having a bag of marijuana or 2 bags of marijuana, or have been arrested 20 times for bags of marijuana over a period of time and not really having the issue of why you're smoking addressed, but have you punished by being incarcerated and not making bail. And so why did the article say that, New York is putting more people in bail when you have this wonderful forefront of bail reform that says, no, we're not going to ask for bail when it comes down to those crimes? And my understanding of the article and reading most of it and reading it twice is that although the bail reform was passed, there was a period of time where it was revised and there was no hearings as to that. And there was no conversation as to that. And the revisions take place within 90 days. So 90 days, if this article is April, so sometime July or August, these revisions are going to take place. And so what is the revision that this article is really targeting? At least from my perspective, I thought it was targeting the fact that New York is taking away cash bail. So, that is not part of the equation. So you say, well, what's your problem, Mr. Russell, with that portion? Well, the problem is that there is a certain portion of the community that does not have credit. There's a certain portion of the community that does not have collateral. So the only way that they can move forward with their lives, if bail is rendered by the court, is by way of cash. It's by way of putting a certain amount of cash up in order to allow someone to be at liberty while they fight their case. So here's the dilemma. Here's the dilemma. One is you're saying we're going to reform, and therefore we're going to put less people in jail. But two, if the only way that bail can be issued is from a non-cash basis, then there's a whole segment of people that wouldn't be in jail because maybe they have $1,000 underneath their mattress. Maybe they can scratch up $750, but maybe they can't scratch up people that have good credit or have collateral. And thereby you're incarcerating those people. And that number might be greater than the number that you release. So in a time where you have COVID and a time that you're trying to decrease the jail population, it is written that New York might actually be increasing the jail population. And another reason why I want to discuss this today, and I'm being very intentional in why we're discussing it, is that, hey, look, speaking legally is a very fluid and real-time show. And if someone texts me or calls me and says, hey, look, I'm trying to get out of jail and I need for you to do a motion for early release, what does that say? That says that this is still out there and it's still on people's minds. And if it's still on that person's mind, then it should be on our mind and we should talk about it. And so here we are talking about it right now.
And that's, when you talk about the legal being the cultural and folks in our community who have loved ones who are incarcerated and in extra danger because of coronavirus, that's a real issue. We have to figure out how we're looking at a forgotten population, because everybody, of course, is focused on their immediate nucleus, what's happening in their home, and maybe loved ones who are in surrounding areas and places. But these are also people's family. Yes, some people are in jail because they rightly committed a crime. Others are falsely accused of a crime that they unfortunately landed in jail. So there's all sorts of layers. But while they're there, the humanity of the fact that until they go through whatever they need to either get out, to appeal, that there should be some sort of safety mechanisms put in place. So,
and this is where New York is like running behind. Right now, as it stands, there's approximately 1,100 cases where inmates are being held on technical violations for parole. And those cases, those folks are going to be let out, right? In Rikers Island, you have about 200 inmates that have corona as it stands now. You have about 400 workers that have corona. Now, let's also understand, before corona hit the streets, there was plenty of conversation about closing Rikers Island and having these other facilities, these smaller facilities in other areas in New York, in the Bronx, in Manhattan, in Queens, you name it. I think that project has been put to the side, right? So we talk about, it's on hold, right? And guess what? Guess it's on hold because Corona got it on hold, right? So Corona and the pandemic has affected a lot of things. So it is on hold, right? And so now, when you talk about inmates and you talk about workers being infected and you're talking about whether folks are being released or not, and you look at like the state of California, in the beginning, they had 3,500 people they were going to release. Now they're up to 8,000. The number is jumping exponentially. That's at least twice as where they were in the beginning. And the numbers are not going in the same trend when it comes down to New York. And so let me just concretely have folks understand what it means to be in a prison when you have corona, because I represent folks. I've done the motions. I've had the motions denied in federal court where a judge is saying, no, you're going to stay in. First of all, the conditions are as following. If you're on lockdown, if you're on what they call quarantine, this is in a federal prison. If you're on quarantine, now, most people would tell you federal prison, even though it is the harsher of the two compared to state, it is probably the less chaotic, even though it's the most, is punitive in nature, is heavy, is the less chaotic than a Rikers. But in Rikers, there's probably more liberties to do whatever you want because the numbers are much greater and the population might be a little bit unsophisticated compared to those in a federal prison. And that's my experience. So in a federal prison, in this one institution, MDC, Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, quarantine means that one day a week, you get a chance to shower and you get a chance to use the phone and you get 1 hour to do one other two. One day. At least with solitaire, which they're banning, solitaire, you get 1 hour a day of either rec time, which is physical time in the gym, and time to shower and take care of your personal needs. No, in quarantine, you get 1 hour a week, maybe two. So that means you're not taking showers. Your hygiene is at the lowest level. You're not getting any what they call rec time, where you get to physically, release some stress. And I don't care who you are, you need that. Talking to someone, bumping and hitting someone, that is just something that people need, their interaction. Now, also on quarantine, no access to your family in reference to physically seeing them. They will not come and see you. They can't come and see you. So you can't rub your wife's hand, your daughter's hand, look at your son's eyes. You can't do that. There is no Zoom. There is no FaceTime. You have no phone. What you will get is extra hours on the phone. You will get free phone calls. But can you imagine I'm on that phone and I'm taking a little longer than the next guy who maybe his wife may be pregnant on the outside, or their family is facing some type of challenge, or just I'm having a bad day and I woke up today and you taking a little long on the phone, what that can do to a person? I mean, that's incarceration on the top of incarceration. So,
That's a lot.
yeah, prison was never meant, from my understanding, where you couldn't see any family at all, no friends, no contact. You can't get on it. You can send an email out, but by the time I get to the email, by the time I send it back, by the time you get a chance to read it, days can go by. I've had people call me and said, I haven't heard from my loved one in 8 days. Can you get information? So that's what quarantine looks like. So we're just not saying just release because they can catch COVID. Look at the totality of humanity, the lack thereof in this situation, and we already know is overcrowded. So that's one segment, and let me just add another segment to it. That's if you're healthy.
Right.
What happens if you're not healthy? What happens if you suffer from asthma? If you suffer from heart condition? If you suffer from a respiratory condition? If you're overweight? If you have diabetes? If you have high blood pressure?
Wow.
You add that to the plate, you get a little whiff of COVID, and it's over. I mean, it could potentially be over. And what is your recourse? To sue the facility? Maybe. Do you think the United States of America is going to allow you to sue the federal prisons because they couldn't control a pandemic, or didn't have the wherewithal, or had a president that didn't forecast or foresee that this was going to happen, and somebody's going to make millions off of it, and you're a person that committed a crime? That's why they had Son of Sam laws and things of that nature, so you couldn't profit off of your criminality. You darn sure ain't going to profit over the fact that you've been in quarantine, and the quarantine, quote unquote, was to protect you from getting the corona disease. It is ridiculous, and it's beyond ridiculous.
Just hearing that, it just, I mean, the humanity of it. And shout out to Richard. How you doing? Thank you for joining. Said the psychological, emotional, and physical breakdown of a person. Exactly. I mean, we know that jail wasn't intended to be an oasis. We get that. There needs to be some rehabilitation, and we can argue all day long whether that's really happening. Hence the change in the criminal justice system, particularly here in New York, moving to these smaller facilities. But just to think about what it feels like for corona to affect you in normal circumstances, in your own home, in your own community, much more in jail, totally separated from any sort of interaction with family, and you can have underlying conditions and folks are being denied. I don't know. That it just hurts my heart to think that some people are sitting in jail who are wrongfully accused. Number one, it's bad for everybody. But on top of the fact that you're sitting there and you could be innocent and you're dealing with all of this and you could potentially die. Because if you're not attended to and you don't get granted that release, these are real things that could happen.
And so, you say that, and that goes with a heavy hand and a heavy voice, because it is the reality. And so when someone says, look, I have kidney failure, or I have some other medical illness that doesn't fall on that list, that is pre-existing, that makes you susceptible or can lead to fatality if you were to be infected by COVID, I can tell you the history of the court as it stands right now. William Barr, he could say whatever he wants, about in reference to what prisons should be doing. The reality is that judges are not doing that. The appellate courts are not accepting that. Those that are allowed to be released free or set released are those that either cooperated with the government, like, you hear the rapper 6ix9ine, who, he got free. Yeah, well, he was a cooperator with the federal government, and he only had but so many days left on his sentence. Or those that commit white collar crimes, those folks are being allowed to walk out. But then there are some other folks that are not being allowed to walk out. Bernie Madoff, you know, he's in there forever. He's not going to see the light of day. Harvey Weinstein, he's in there. He's not going to see the light of day. They tried. It is not working. So I don't want us to think that these efforts are only skin deep, that it only happens to Black folks or folks of color. Disproportionately, we're denied, but folks are being denied. So what I can say to those who listening out there and who have family members is be very, very, very proactive in making sure that your family members get certain treatment. And for what it's worth, it doesn't hurt to try to apply or try to have an attorney file that motion for early release, especially if someone is sentenced and they don't have that much to do, it's that far to go as far as their sentence is concerned, or someone who is suffering from a variety of challenges while incarcerated, to have that motion filed. Because what happens? A no is a no. That's all can happen. But who knows? You might be surprised.
Well, to be continued. All we can do is just pray for some sort of opportunity for justice in the sense of health justice, not in the fact of what they need to serve or time they need to spend for the thing that they did, but just health disparities, health justice. It hurts my heart because they're connected to somebody. They have a family on the outside who's going crazy, just trying to figure out what and how they're going to survive this. So let's continue to have these conversations, but let people be aware also that you can talk to an attorney like Mr. Russell, like Mr. Pichardo, so that you can find out how to put in that request. Whether or not it will be denied or accepted is another thing, but at least you have someone to go to help advocate for you and to get recourse where possible.
And we have to remember, I'm sorry just to interrupt you, we have to remember that a lot of this is looked at from a standpoint of outside, people coming from the outside into the facility, and people then become affected, right? Because what you bring from the outside, you bring to the inside. And Ed is not here. One of the things that he talked about when we joke, are you social distancing? And he says, I am, but I'm also social trusting, right? So I'm trusting those that I am around, that they're taking care of themselves. So if we are together and we decide to pull down the mask, that we don't infect one another. And even for myself, sometimes I get up or I go to the post office or I'll go out the house and I go down the block and realize I don't have a mask. And I'm like, wow, we are in a world where you need a mask, and it is surreal. It's like, wait a minute, this is a different world that we're talking about. So when you say, all right, we don't want people from the outside to come into the prison to infect those, that bad air is just being circled around anyway. And the correction officers and the marshals, they're going home to somebody and they're coming back. So you have to socially trust them. And we hear stories of, at least in Rikers, people, bottling their feces and stuff like that, and they're throwing it at those that they don't like. When someone turns the corner, whether it's an inmate that they have a problem with, or whether it is a guard that they have a problem with, these type of conditions where you can't reach and touch someone can only facilitate frustrations where acts of violence are on the uptick, and we don't hear anything about it. You can't tell me in the hot summers of July, where you can't touch, you can't feel, you can't go out and play basketball, lift weights, that there's not fights that are going on the inside, and at the riot gear, when you have it on and you try to break it up, that those masks don't come off. And there's more harm than good that happens. It's just being suppressed. It's like the homeless people that die in the MTA and the tracks and the train tracks. It happens, but it's just being suppressed. And so we need to be mindful that some of this information is being suppressed, and hopefully we can bring it to light here on Speaking Legally.
We hope so, because it's definitely, we see the uptick happening in communities. Gun violence is up 200% in Queens. We're getting ready to do a rally I just got off the phone with the Queens DA a couple of hours ago about this particular effort to call for peace. Like, this is the last thing we need. In the middle of COVID-19, in the middle of bringing light to the racial injustice, we don't need each other killing each other. And it's gone up 200% in just a couple of months.
And we don't need to have any story help to facilitate the false narrative that our communities need to be more policed, and our communities need to be handled with a heavy hand. We don't need any of that. So the way you get around that is put the guns down. I think I did an Instagram the other day. I was like, well, what happens to folks using their hands? What happened to these? Like, y'all don't use these anymore. It's like the Smitties, the 1-2, you get knocked out, you get up, you fight them again the next day. Matter of fact, I saw my brother chime in, and he knows what I mean about the Smitties. Every summer, he would have a fight with this guy named Clarence Mayo. Now, Clarence Mayo had a younger brother named Chris Mayo. We used to call him Mickey Mouse. And, I always have to be on guard just in case Chris jumped in. But Chris is the nicest guy. He would never jump in. But almost every other summer, you knew that my brother was going to fight Clarence. It was going to happen. It don't matter. It was going to happen. And if it didn't happen one summer, you're like, oh, it didn't happen. But it would probably happen the next summer. But they would have this fight routinely. And it wouldn't be a fight every day. It would just be the one fight, the one summer. Like, it's coming. Like, it's just coming. I would have a fight with a guy who's a pastor. His name is Reggie and Vincent. They're both pastors. They're brothers. One was my age. One was 1 year younger than me. Every summer, I'm going to fight Reggie and Vincent. That just was happening. It's just it. You had to fight and you keep it moving, but those days don't exist anymore. And therefore, they don't exist. And it feeds into a false narrative of how our community should be treated. So get to the bag, y'all. Get to the bag. Bob and weave. Get busy. Live to see another day.
Live to see another day is so important. Really put the guns down. You did, share that message, which I think is appropriate. We keep saying it in addition to telling our children and whoever, because not just young people that are using these guns, but we need alternate things for them to do. We need to get them engaged. We need to talk about the summer youth program alternatives that are happening. We need to figure out how Black businesses, as we started the show, can be cash flow positive so they can hire more people. Everything is connected, and we need to give ourselves as a community a real talking to on how we take care of what we need to take care of in-house, so we don't feed anybody else's narrative about the things that we are doing in our community. And I'm confident that we can definitely make that happen. It's a long road ahead. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. There are multiple layers, multiple verticals of issues that we're dealing with, and we all have to do our part in the one that we respect. Richard said,
yeah, well, I tried to get him before he even responded. Let me just say he was victorious more than he was a loser. So he was a heavyweight champ for a long time. If it was a draw, then he walked away with a draw, but he never lost. So, the fight only lasted for 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds top. I give him the W. He has a W for the rest of his life. But this is what happens when you know a guy like me. I don't forget.
Yeah, clearly, he has to love you as his brother. But we appreciate you all tuning in today. We're about to close out our show, a little special, just like we opened it up. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate you sharing this broadcast each and every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Speaking Legally is where the legal meets the cultural. Our goal is to educate our community so you're aware of what you need to know. Ignorance is not a defense. Ignorance of the law is not a defense. You need to know how to operate, what to do, and how we can empower each other and utilize the resources in our community. Royce Russell, Esquire, Edward Pichardo, Esquire, 2 individuals who are on the ground doing this work every single day. If something happens, you want someone to call. You don't want to wait till something happens until you know who to call. So you can contact them on their website. You can get a copy of Cardiac Arrest Book, which is a tactical guide on how to handle unlawful police stops. You can visit Law Office of Edward Pichardo.com or RoyceRussellEsquire.com. So thank you for being here. Stay tuned. We'll be back again next week with another show. Wear your mask.